Minister of Finance affirms control of public debts. Special economic zones, a tool to accelerate economic growth. Hello and thank you for tuning in to Bizline, your special economic magazine on VTV4. You're with me, Ling Huang. In this Bizline, we'll talk about special economic zones and the opportunities and challenges it's going to bring to a developing economy like Vietnam. But before we get to that, let's take a look at several highlights in the economic scene for the past week. Minister of Finance Dinh Dien Dung joined a Q&A session about matters related to financial sector this Tuesday at the National Assembly's 7th session. Public debts, repayment capacity and solutions to public debts to maintain national financial safety were major concerns. According to reports, public debt has risen in recent years. The ratio of public debt to gross domestic product or GDP stood at 51.7% in 2010 and 54% last year. Minister of Finance affirmed that the public debt is still under control, below the regulated ratio of 65%. A Vietnam-Poland Economic Forum was held in Hanoi this Wednesday to further boost the economic trade relations between the two nations. Co-organized by the Embassy of Poland in Hanoi and the Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry, or VCCI, the event took place during a Vietnam visit by the Deputy Foreign Minister of Poland. At the forum, the two sides exchanged cooperation opportunities in such areas as finance, insurance, information technology, pharmaceuticals, food, confectionery, and energy, among others. Hanoi's industrial parks, or IPs, and export processing zones, or EPZs, will coordinate closely with relevant bodies to help foreign direct investment, or FDI, firms in dealing with export and import procedures. It was suggested during a workshop held by the Ministry of Industry and Trade's Export and Import Department and the Management Board of Hanoi's Industrial Parks and Export Processing Zones this Tuesday that difficulties for FDI firms in the capital's IPs and EPZs be removed. According to the Hanoi Department of Planning and Investment, Hanoi's FDI registered capital to date this year is estimated at $560 million, up 13.7% against the same period last year. The major mobile network operator Mobifone has split from the state-owned Vietnam Post and Telecommunications VNPT and is now under the management of the Ministry of Information and Communications, or MIC. The demerger follows a recent decision by Prime Minister Nguyễn Tân Dũng to approve a restructuring plan proposed by VNPT, which came into effect on Tuesday. The equitization plan will see the state retain a 75% stake in Mobifone Communications Corporation, with 25% to be held by investors, including foreign shareholders. According to the MIC, splitting mobile phone from VNPT would allow Mobifone to consolidate its strong telecommunications brand both at home and abroad. The equitization also aims to enhance Mobifone's appeal to investors. The telco giant posted profits of over $285 million last year, while Mobifone's equitization consultant Credit Suisse previously valued the telco at $2 billion. According to a high-ranking official from the Ministry of Industry and Trade, expanding export and import markets is considered an urgent need as the global economy faces unforeseeable changes and the regional and international political situation remains complicated. The ministry has implemented various solutions on market development, commercial promotion, and international economic integration enhancement. Bilateral and multilateral negotiations with major potential markets have been boosted with the signing of 8 free trade agreements, including those with the ASEAN, the EU, the US, and Japan. 8 commercial banks signed a credit package linking credit sources, investors, contractors, and material suppliers in the construction sector on Thursday under the chairmanship of the State Bank of Vietnam. The package aims to help businesses and investors access capital from banks to complete projects at a reasonable cost. The initiative was suggested by the Bank of Investment and Development Vietnam to aid the real estate market. Up until May this year, BIDV has signed contracts for 11 projects with a total investment of over $764 million. The plan aims to generate credit flows, ensure progress, and reduce bad debts in the banking sector. We've just reviewed several highlights for the past week. Up next, we'll talk about the development of special economic zones in the world and in Vietnam in our crosstalk. The idea of establishing special economic zones, or SEZs, in Vietnam was first mentioned at the 4th plenum of the 8th National Party Congress in 1997. Since then, Vietnam has had 15 coastal economic zones offering preferential policies in tax and land leasing fees to attract investors. However, as admitted by the head of the Communist Party Central Committee's Economics Commission, Vương Đình Huệ, the existing economic zones in Vietnam cannot compete with the free economic zones in the region and the world. Vietnam is now considering projects to establish several special economic zones across the country, and Crosstalk this week seeks to understand the role of a special economic zone to a developing economy like Vietnam and important factors the country needs to take into account. Our guest today is Ha Thanh Tú, an expert from McKinsey & Company in Vietnam. McKinsey is a leading international management consultant with presence in over 90 countries in the world. But before we talk, let's take a look at the following.
To date, there are around 3,000 special economic zones established across 116 countries and territories throughout the world. Although the idea of a special economic zone was first considered by Vietnam in 1997, it was not until 2002 that the country piloted the Chu Lai Open Economic Zone in Quảng Nam Province. Vietnam now has 15 economic zones, which collectively cover an area of 54,000 hectares. According to economist Nguyễn Minh Phong, compared to other countries in the region, Vietnam has been slower to establish SEZs. Although this has made it challenging for Vietnam to stand out amongst its field of competitors, it also offers the country the chance to learn from others' experience.
Về lợi thế cụ thể của Việt Nam trong cái bối cảnh hiện nay thì tôi cho rằng là có hai cái điểm lớn. Một là chúng ta đang tạo ra được những cái hấp dẫn xét về mặt thể chế, đặc biệt là những khuyến khích dành cho các nhà đầu tư nước ngoài, nhất là những nhà đầu tư mà hướng tới chuyển giao công nghệ cũng như là hướng tới cái việc mà khai thác sâu và xuất khẩu. Trên thực tế, những cái diện tích dành cho công nghiệp rất là lớn, đủ và đa rộng ở tất cả các tỉnh, gần như một phong trào để cho các nhà đầu tư nước ngoài tăng cơ hội lựa chọn, và mỗi địa phương đều tích cực coi đó như là một trong những cái điểm đột kích, những điểm nhấn trong cái bức tranh kinh tế cũng như trong cái lựa chọn ưu tiên chính sách của địa phương mình.
At the 8th plenum of the 11th National Assembly, 3 notable economic zones were earmarked to be upgraded to SEZs. These were Vân Đồn in the northern province of Quảng Ninh, Vân Phong in the central province of Khánh Hòa, and Phu Quoc Island, part of Kiên Giang province in the south. These 3 zones are expected to become the country's most dynamic and liberal economic hubs, with plenty of incentives to generate spillover benefits for the surrounding areas. At an international conference on developing special economic zones held in March this year, Vice Chairwoman of the National Assembly, Nguyễn Thị Kim Ngân, affirmed that establishing SEZs is vital to creating economic stimuli for the country. The attending experts and government officials discussed the key elements to developing SEZs in the country.
Có một cái thể chế cạnh tranh cả về kinh tế và về hành chính. Cái thứ hai là phải xác định được cái ngành nghề như thế nào để cho nó phù hợp với tiềm năng khác biệt, lợi thế cạnh tranh cũng như là những cái mà cái thuận lợi của đặc khu kinh tế nếu chúng ta xây dựng. Đấy là cái thứ hai. Và cái thứ ba là làm sao chúng ta tạo được một cái nguồn nhân lực đáp ứng được cái yêu cầu.
Khi thành lập đặc khu, chúng tôi cũng rất hy vọng bằng các cái văn bản luật hóa thì sẽ tạo ra một cái hành lang pháp lý hết sức là thông thoáng, hết sức là thống nhất, hết sức là bền vững Và thông qua cái hành lang này thì chúng ta sẽ tạo ra được nhiều cái cơ chế chính sách có thể nói là vượt trội ưu đãi để mà đủ sức cạnh tranh.
The National Assembly is expected to design and approve the legal framework regarding SEZs, thereby speeding up the development of SEZs in the future.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to have you with us in our show. First of all, what's the definition of special economic zone and how is it different from free trade zone, export processing zone, or free administrative zones?
The notion of special economic zone is really twofold. Number one, it is really an approach by the government to accelerate economic development. This is to be done in a contained and specific locations, typically in the locations that it is easier to manage rather to do this across the board in a nation. And the second notion is really about leveraging and using the competitive advantage to achieve higher growth for a country. There are many types of zones or economic clusters, if you call, and it started in 1970s and 1980s. You see a lot of sector-specific or industry-led the industrial zones or economic development zones in India, in China, in the Middle East. But recently, I think the evolution has led to a much more value-add driven and services-driven kind of zones. So you see, for example, in Dubai, there are media city, there are internet city. You see in Singapore, there are biotech cluster. You see in India, there are BTO outsourcing center like Bangalore. So the evolution has been really evolving from the classic industrial zone to a much more integrated and value-added economic clusters.
What's the role of a special economic zone to a developing economy?
If it's successful, the role of special economic zone is really a powerful tool to accelerate the economic development, as I mentioned. It creates jobs. In Dubai, for example, the job creation from a particular zone like Jebel Ali has created over 20% of total job creation in Dubai alone. In addition to job creation, it attracts exports. It also helps improve the competitiveness of the country. And it also allows the creation of new sector or a sector mix, which would have been much more difficult to do at the base economy.
From a government's perspective, what are the criteria for a locality to become a special economic zone?
It really depends on what type of zones, what sectors. Is it service versus manufacturing? However, there are elements, or we call preconditions, that are important. Is there an access to talent pool? Because for service cluster like financial sector, it is very important to be able to attract the right talent to work in such a zone. Is there access to national, regional, global marketplace? So if we take, let's say, Jebel Ali in Dubai, Jebel Ali has been developed over 15, 20 years ago. And to today, it has become a really vibrant, dynamic logistic hub. And so if you look at today, there are 6,000 flights out of Dubai to the rest of the world, of which 300 flights to India alone every week, because India is one of their largest trading partner. But it is also about taking only 4 hours from Dubai by flight, and you can reach more than 33% of world population or 12% of world GDP. So these are very important things if you position yourself as a service and logistics center. And so the step that you would like to think about is competitive advantage position as a base. And ultimately on top, you would need to have a very sound business case. But then the pillar to make it success is really the focused. So I'm talking about a number of sectors that you would develop in a zone. Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 10? It is about the limited resources that the government can put in for infrastructure to kickstart the development. I can take Morocco as an example. They have developed an amazing automotive sector. From what we've learned, they have started scanning over 2,000 parts of automotive value chains, and they have zoomed in only over 100 parts that they feel they have a cost competitive advantage in producing some of these parts. So that was the very first important step, that they really focus on these 100 parts and really doing the best job in delivering this part at a quality and at a low cost to investor.
Mm-hmm. So it's very crucial for the government to pinpoint the position that the special economic zone will play in the value chain.
Absolutely. I think this is true everywhere, especially developing countries, because you cannot have too many focus. It's not just about natural resources, it's not about financing and funding, but it's also about human capital, it's about management capabilities.
Vietnam has chosen several localities to establish special economic zones, including Vân Đồn in Quảng Ninh, Vân Phong in Khánh Hòa, and Phu Quoc in Kiên Giang province. How do you think about these options?
These are all accessible locations, and as I mentioned, it is more important to understand what are the competitive advantage for these locations or for the region. What can they bring in terms of values proposition to the investor? What products, what services would be the core led development strategy for the sector? So these are important.
Located in the center of the Southeast Asian region and covering an area of 574 square kilometers, Phu Quoc Island is almost as large as the island country of Singapore. The island's economy is centered on a fast-growing tourism sector with stunning white sand beaches. With its new international airport, which came into operation in late 2012, Phu Quoc has since been able to connect with several domestic and regional destinations, leaving the door wide open for tourism. Since early this year, Phu Quoc has been linked to the national power grid via the 58-kilometer undersea cable, the longest of its kind in Southeast Asia. Last year, Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng signed a decision to upgrade the island to a special administrative economic zone directly under the central government by 2020. This will be a national and international ecotourism resort and entertainment center, an important hub of local transport and international aviation, and a locality with a special position in terms of national security and defense.
The still largely untapped Vân Đồn is amongst the biggest island districts in the north of Vietnam, with easy access to other economic and political centers in the region. It is located along a corridor linking China and several ASEAN countries. Vân Đồn is also close to Ha Long Bay, a UNESCO World Cultural Heritage Site, as well as Hai Phong, a major port city in the north of Vietnam. Since 2009, the government has taken the necessary preparations to develop Vân Đồn as an economic zone, focusing mainly on sea tourism and luxury entertainment. Last year, the Politburo approved a plan to build an integrated casino resort on the island. So what kinds of incentives can the government offer to the enterprises operating in a special economic zone?
Ultimately, investors are looking for two things: cost of doing business and ease of doing business. So the hard factor, like cost of doing business, are really tax mechanisms, import tax. It depends on what kind of cluster and what kind of economic zones type. But the hard factors this day are easier to be given to investor. Also basic infrastructure like roads, airport, access to gateway, to waterway, but also specific legal and regulatory environment for the business to operate in such zone. Now, we find that the soft factors are much more difficult and challenging to be given to the investor. And here we're looking at, is it easy enough for the investor to get this incentive on the paper when they actually execute the project? How fast, how convenient, how easy to deliver some of these promises. It's very important to kickstart the development, and having the tax holidays and the financial incentives to attract especially the early investors. But ultimately, there is no incentive that can subsidize 15 years of operation. So it is just not possible.
What are key to attracting the right anchor tenants?
It is very important to be able to attract this investor and tenants into your zones in the first 3 to 5 years. So a good example is Dubai International Financial Center, DIFC. DIFC was created over 10 years ago as a free financial center in the middle of Dubai City. However, the very first success and very first important step that they were able to do was to attract a very international bank like Standard Chartered to be the first anchor tenant into the zone. Having Standard Chartered in the DIFC has really created the reputation and the branding for the zone itself to develop the ecosystem around it. Another example is Iskandar development in Malaysia. This is another zone that is a border of Malaysia to Singapore. And Legoland was a very first important anchor tenant because they were able to use the image and the branding of Legoland to attract other tenants and other developers into the region. There is a real competition these days that the investor have many choices around the world to come and make the investment. So yes, the hard incentive as we talk about, and here it often be 20 years of tax-free, for example, a corporate tax-free, for example. But on top of that is also about the approach to attract this investor. Do we have a performing and professional investment promotion team? Do they have the capability to articulate very clearly what is the value proposition to the investor so that they would come in? It is also about to build enough infrastructure. So one example is Suzhou Industrial Zone, for example, in China. They have invested over $1.2 billion in building the basic infrastructure. It basically is a strategy to provide like Singapore infrastructure. But for a long period of time, they had a difficulty in attracting the tenants who would be willing to pay such fee. So it is important to know what is enough to get kickstart. Under investment for basic infrastructure is also a failure, but over investment in the basic infrastructure is also not a successful thing to do.
So what can be the challenges to setting up an SEZ, and what are the success factors to an SEZ?
There are more than 50% of zones around the world are not meeting the target. So it is a very challenging development tool. What we've seen is that typically a economic cluster or economic zone take more than 10 and 15 years to even really show the success or the sign of success. Therefore, it is important to know that we need to attract long-term capital and not short-term capital. It is important to know that you need to invest just enough to kickstart the development in the early time. And finally, it is important that you have the right strategy and identify the right type and model for the zone that you would like to develop.
We have talked about some failure cases and some success cases of a special economic zone.
Yeah.
So what should Vietnam take into account in order to avoid the failures and to kickstart and boost the development of special economic zone in the country?
Again, I think it is about having a complete and integrated ecosystem around the zone. with a very clearly articulated strategy for the zone. So do we have a clear aspiration and a clear vision for what kind of zone do we want to develop? Is it manufacturing? Is it services? If it's a manufacturing, what products do we provide? Where do we sell the products? Or if it's a service, who do we serve? Whom do we serve? So these are very fundamental elements early on. And then it's about translating some of these ideas and promises on the paper into reality, into the action. So having, again, a world-class, very reputable execution capability, really deliver on what you promised is very important to attract investors. Mm-hmm. And finally, again, I think the whole concept of special economic zone is about leveraging on your competitive advantage with some kickstart at the beginning, but eventually the development of zone need to start up and need to pick it up on its own to be successful and to be sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Well, many thanks for spending your time in our show today.
My pleasure.
Well, special economic zones, or SEZs, refer to these designated areas in countries that possess special economic regulations that are different from other areas in the same country. We hope that our crosstalk this week has helped you understand how special economic zones can help speed up Vietnam's economic growth and what international models of SEZs that some localities in Vietnam should and can learn from. This also wraps up our edition of Bizline this week. Many thanks for being with us. You can always get in touch with us via email at bizline@vtv.vn, and see you next week.